November 19, 1942. The Don River Steppe. A vast featureless plain of frozen earth under a bruised gray sky. The wind is a physical force, slicing through the thin wool of Romanian army overcoats, carrying the scent of ice and iron. In shallow trenches, soldiers huddle for warmth, their breath crystallizing in the air. The morning is quiet. Deceptively so. For weeks, the front has been a static line of attrition, a stalemate defined by hunger, frostbite, and the gnawing tension of the wait. But at 7:20 Moscow time, the quiet shatters. A sound begins, not a single shot, but a low, continuous roar from beyond the horizon, growing until it consumes all thought. The ground trembles violently. Over 3,500 Soviet artillery pieces have opened fire simultaneously. A wall of high explosive and shrapnel descends upon the Romanian positions. For the men of the Third Army, it is the beginning of the end. They are simply the first, unsuspecting hinge on which a colossal door was about to slam shut. That door had been forged months earlier, in the blistering heat of the 1942 Ukrainian summer. On June 28th, the German Wehrmacht launched Operation Blue. Fall Blau. It was the primary German offensive on the Eastern Front for the year. A colossal undertaking aimed at delivering a fatal blow to the Soviet Union. The objective was not Moscow, but oil. The German war machine was thirsty. Its panzers, planes, and trucks required a constant supply of fuel, and the vast oil fields of the Caucasus at Grozny and Baku were the prize. Seizing them would cripple the Red Army and sustain the Third Reich for years to come. Stalingrad. A sprawling industrial city stretched along the western bank of the Volga River, was initially a secondary objective. It was a key transport hub, but its primary military purpose in Operation Blue was to anchor the long northern flank of the main German advance southward. The German Sixth Army, under the command of General Friedrich Paulus, was tasked with taking the city. The initial advance was devastatingly successful. Soviet defenses, still reeling from the disasters of 1941, crumbled. The panzer divisions raced across the open steppe, covering hundreds of miles, seemingly unstoppable. Victory appeared not just possible, but imminent. It was in this atmosphere of supreme confidence that Adolf Hitler made a fateful decision. On July 23rd, he split his forces. He redirected the 4th Panzer Army south to help Army Group A in the Caucasus, before ordering it back towards Stalingrad, while ordering Army Group B, with Paulus's 6th Army as its spearhead, to complete the capture of the city. This act of hubris fatally divided German strength and stretched logistics to the breaking point. The front was now an impossibly thin line over 1,000 miles long. By late August, the 6th Army had reached the outskirts of Stalingrad. The Luftwaffe subjected the city to one of the most intense bombing campaigns of the war, dropping over 1,000 tons of explosives in 48 hours. The city was transformed into a sea of fire and rubble. But this destruction did not break the defenders. Instead, it created a perfect urban fortress. The shattered factories, collapsed apartment blocks, and cratered streets became a defender's paradise of kill zones. Sniper nests and ambush points dot inside this inferno. General Vasily Zhukov's Soviet 62nd Army refused to yield. Heeding Stalin's order, no 227, not one step back, his men contested every street, every building, every room. The battle devolved into a savage, close-quarter struggle the Germans called Rattenkrieg, the Rat War. The front line was no longer a line on a map, but the wall between two rooms, the floorboards of a contested factory hall. German stormtroopers, masters of maneuver warfare, were now forced into a meat grinder, their tanks neutralized in the narrow, rubble-choked streets. The fight for the Red October tractor factory, the Barakati gun factory, and a single grain elevator consumed entire divisions. The 6th Army, one of the Wehrmacht's finest formations, was being bled white for tactical objectives that had lost all strategic meaning. While the world's attention was fixed on this epic struggle, the German High Command made another, equally critical error. To protect the 6th Army's vastly overextended flanks, which stretched for hundreds of miles across the empty steppe north and south of the city, they deployed their allied armies. The Romanian 3rd Army held the northern flank. The Romanian 4th Army held the southern. Between them were Italian and Hungarian forces. These armies were poorly equipped, possessing obsolete tanks and inadequate anti-tank, guns incapable of stopping the Soviet T-34. They lacked winter clothing, proper supplies, and their morale was brittle. They were the weak hinges holding the German front together. The German command was aware of this weakness, but they gambled, believing the Red Army was a spent force. Incapable of a major offensive, the German focus was absolute, a tactical obsession with the rubble at their feet. They saw only the enemy in front of them, in the next shattered building, the next sewer pipe. They failed to see the vast silent preparations taking place on the horizon, where a strategic masterpiece of deception and force was taking shape. That masterpiece was taking shape far from the fighting, in the quiet, smoke-filled rooms of the Kremlin. While German generals fixated on a tactical map of Stalingrad's districts, the Soviet High Command Stavka looked at a strategic map of the entire southern front. They saw not a city to be defended, but a trap to be sprung. The concept was born in mid-September, in a meeting between Joseph Stalin and his two most capable commanders, General Georgi Zhukov and General Alexander Vasilevsky. Zhukov, Stalin's deputy supreme commander, was a man forged from pure willpower, the troubleshooter sent to the most desperate sectors of the front. Vasilevsky, the chief of the general staff, was his counterpart, a quiet, meticulous strategist, a master of logistics and operational detail. Together, they formed a perfect synthesis of strategic brilliance and ruthless execution. The plan they presented was breathtaking in its audacity. Codenamed Uranus, it was not a frontal assault to relieve the 62nd Army. It was a classic double envelopment, a pincer movement on a colossal scale aimed at the weak Romanian flanks. The Soviets would not push the Germans out of Stalingrad. They would encircle and annihilate the entire 6th Army, along with parts of the 4th Panzer Army. It was a mirror image of the very Kesselschlacht, or Cauldron Battle, that the Wehrmacht had used to decimate Soviet armies in 1941. The students had learned their master's deadly lesson. To achieve this, Stavka initiated a mobilization of staggering proportions, all conducted under a fanatical devotion to secrecy. This was the Soviet doctrine of maskirovka, military deception on a scale never before seen. An army of nearly 1 million men, over 1,500 tanks, 2,500 heavy guns, and 13,000 mortar was quietly assembled on the steppes. Entire armies materialized as if from the frozen earth. To the northwest of Stalingrad, the newly formed southwestern front under Nikolai Vechidin gathered its strength. To the south, Andrei Yeremenko's Stalingrad front did the same. The logistical effort was immense. Thousands of trains moved east, but only at night, their cargo holds packed with T-34 tanks, artillery, and fresh Siberian divisions acclimatized to the brutal cold. During the day, they remained silent and camouflaged on sidings. Troops marched cross-country in darkness, observing absolute light and sound discipline. Radio traffic was a constant stream of false information, designed to convince German intelligence that any Soviet buildup was for a purely defensive winter posture. Meanwhile, diversionary attacks were launched hundreds of miles to the north. In the Erzev sector, bleeding German reserves and convincing the German High Command that the main Soviet effort would come against Army Group Center, near Moscow. German intelligence, Foreign Armies East, saw fragments of this activity but consistently misinterpreted it. They noted troop movements but assessed them as routine rotations. They acknowledged the weakness of the Romanian flanks but fatally underestimated the Red Army's capacity to exploit it. They believed the Soviets were at the end of their operational tether, incapable of anything more than local attacks. The Germans saw the trees, a few new tank depots, some increased rail traffic, but remained blind to the forest. They could not conceive that the enemy they had beaten so soundly for 18 months was capable of orchestrating an operation of such complexity and scale. By mid-November, the pieces were in place. The Soviet tank and mechanized corps, the sharp points of the twin spears, were hidden in ravines and forests just miles from the front. The artillery was registered on its targets. The men, issued white winter camouflage and told little of the grand plan, simply waited for the order. The first heavy snows of winter began to fall, blanketing the steppe in a shroud of white, further concealing the greatest concentration of military power the war had yet seen. The plan was a study in strategic geometry. Two massive armored spearheads were now coiled in the frozen mists of the steppe, one to the northwest, the other far to the south. Their designated meeting point lay deep in the German rear, at a small town called Kalach-on-the-dome. If the plan was geometry, its lines were drawn by men. For the Soviet riflemen of the 21st Army, huddled in a hastily dug trench northwest of Kletskaya, the grand strategy was an abstraction. His reality was the biting cold that seeped through his quilted telegraphic jacket and the rough wool of his greatcoat. It was the solid weight of his Mosin Nagant rifle, its steel too cold to touch with a bare hand. He knew little of Zhukov or Vasilevsky and nothing of the town named Kalach. His world was this patch of frozen earth, the man next to him, and the orders whispered down the line. He had been told to advance, to break the enemy, to not stop. For weeks he had marched at night and hidden by day, a ghost moving across the steppe. He had seen the endless columns of T-34 tanks, camouflaged with white paint and pine boughs, their diesel engines rumbling softly in the darkness. He had seen the stacks of ammunition, the rows of cannons, a power so immense it felt like a physical pressure in the air. He was hungry, exhausted, and gripped by a cold, hard fear. But beneath it, there was something else. A flicker of hope. A sense that the long retreat was over, that the tide was about to turn. Then came the order for readiness. A silence fell, thick and absolute. And in that silence, he waited for the storm he knew was coming. Across no man's land, his opposite number, a Romanian corporal in the 13th Infantry Division, felt a different kind of cold. It was the chill of neglect. His German allies called him brave, but supplied him with their cast-offs. His anti-tank gun was the 3.7 centimeters PaK-36, a weapon the Germans had nicknamed the Encirclement, Army's door knocker, for its pathetic inability to penetrate a T-34's armor. His comrades were stretched thin, a brittle crust holding back an unknown pressure. They had seen the signs, searchlights probing the sky at night, the distant sound of engines, captured partisans who spoke of massive Soviet formations. Their officers had passed the warnings up the chain of command, but the response from the German 6th Army headquarters was dismissive. The Soviets were finished, incapable of a major operation. So the corporal waited in his shallow pit, his faith not in his weapon, but in the reputation of the German army behind him. He believed, because he had to, that the Wehrmacht was invincible, that nothing truly catastrophic could happen. He was a sentry guarding a fortress, unaware that the walls were made of glass and the enemy held a sledgehammer. The first shell of the Soviet barrage did not scream. It simply arrived, and his world dissolved into noise and black earth. This profound disconnect between perception and reality extended to the highest levels of command. In his forward bunker with the southwestern front, Georgi Zhukov was a coiled spring of violent energy. He was not a distant strategist. He was an enforcer, a physical embodiment of Stavka's will. He had personally inspected the assault divisions, berated commanders, and ensured every last detail of the plan was in place. For him, this was not a gamble. It was a mathematical certainty, the application of overwhelming force at the weakest possible point. He understood the German mindset, their arrogance, their tactical rigidity, their dismissal of Soviet strength. He had used it as a weapon against them. Miles away, at the 6th Army's headquarters in Golubinski, General Friedrich Paulus oversaw a different war. His maps showed the districts of Stalingrad, the factory halls, the individual buildings. His daily reports dealt in meters of ground gained, in casualties for control of a single workshop. He was a meticulous, cautious staff officer, wholly consumed by the brutal logic of the urban meat grinder. The warnings from his Romanian allies about the flanks were a distraction, a background noise to the primary, all-important task of taking the city. He was focused on the final moves of a chess game, oblivious to the fact that his opponent was about to flip the entire board. Flipping the board began with the turn of a key. Inside the freezing steel hull of a T-34 tank, a young lieutenant of the 1st Tank Corps watched the second hand of his watch. His world was a cramped space, smelling of diesel fuel, sweat, and cold metal. For an hour, he and his crew had listened to the symphony of destruction from their own artillery, a continuous rolling thunder that vibrated through the very marrow of their bones. It was the sound of retribution. His tank, crudely whitewashed, was one of hundreds hidden in a shallow ravine, waiting. The T-34 was a beast born for this landscape. Its wide tracks would glide over the snow that bogged down German panzers. Its sloped armor could deflect the useless shells of the Romanian guns. Its 76mm cannon was a fist that could punch through anything the enemy had on this front. The lieutenant felt the tank shudder as the V2 diesel engine coughed to life, a deep, guttural roar that joined a chorus of hundreds of others. The barrage began to walk forward, moving deeper into the enemy lines. A green flare arced across the gray sky. That was the signal. He gave the order. The driver slammed the transmission into gear, and with a lurch, the 487th Tank Battalion surged out of its hiding place. They rolled past their own infantry, who rose from the earth like specters in their white camouflage, cheering hoarsely. Through his narrow vision slit, the lieutenant saw the Romanian trenches, a chaotic mess of splintered wood, mangled wire, and dark earth. There was no coherent defense. Just stunned, terrified men, some trying to flee, others trying to fight with weapons that were little more than toys. His gunner fired. The cannons report a sharp crack inside the turret. The shell hit a machine gun nest and it simply vanished. They did not slow down. Their orders were not to fight for trenches, but to drive. To drive deep and fast into the enemy's rear, towards a place on the map called Kalach at the headquarters of the Romanian 4th Army Corps. A German liaison officer, a major from the Wehrmacht, listened to the field telephone with growing disbelief. The voice on the other end was frantic, broken by static and the nearby crump of explosions. Tanks. Hundreds of tanks. They are everywhere. We cannot stop them. The major had dismissed the initial Romanian anxieties as their typical nervousness. He had seen the intelligence reports from 6th Army. The Soviets were capable only of local probing attacks. This, however, was not a probe. This was a deluge. The reports flooding the command post painted a picture of total collapse. Entire divisions were being bypassed, their command posts overrun. The lines on his map, so neat and orderly an hour ago, were now meaningless. He saw Romanian gun crews firing their little door-knocker cannons at the waves of T-34s, the shells bouncing off the tank's armor like pebbles. He saw panic take hold as the Soviet behemoths rolled right over their gun pits and trenches, their tracks crushing men and equipment without pause. The carefully constructed German front, the flank that was supposed to be secure, was not bending. It was shattering into 1,000 pieces. He tried to contact the German E-Corps, the nearest armored reserve, but the lines were dead. The speed of the Soviet advance was incomprehensible. They were moving faster than his mind could process the disaster. He looked out the bunker entrance at the swirling snow, realizing with a cold certainty that the fortress he had believed in was an illusion. The walls had been breached, and the flood was pouring in from all sides. From 5,000 feet, the battlefield was a silent, abstract horror. A German Focke-Wulf 189 reconnaissance pilot, taking advantage of a momentary break in the thick cloud cover, banked his aircraft and stared down at the steppe. The Ahu, the flying eye of the German army, was supposed to provide clarity. But what he saw defied all logic, all intelligence estimates. Below him, the pure white landscape was scarred with black lines, dozens of them, stretching from the northeast as far as the eye could see. They were tracks, the tracks of thousands of vehicles. He followed them with his eyes and saw the source, immense columns of Soviet armor and trucks, moving unopposed across the open plain. They weren't attacking the front. They had already obliterated it. They were a river of steel, flowing around the static German and Romanian positions, heading deep into the rear. He saw tiny puffs of smoke and flashes of light, where isolated pockets of resistance were being systematically extinguished. He keyed his radio, his voice tight with urgency, reporting the unbelievable scale of the attack. But he knew it was too late. The Luftwaffe was largely grounded by the weather. There were no significant panzer reserves to call upon. Down below, he was witnessing the execution of a perfect strategic maneuver, a sight both terrible and magnificent. The sledgehammers had fallen. Now, across the frozen steppe, two iron sickles began their inexorable swing, carving a path through the shattered front lines. Destined to meet and close the ring, the sickles began to swing at astonishing speed. By midday on November 19th, the Romanian Third Army had ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. It had evaporated into a panicked mass of fleeing soldiers and shattered equipment. Into this vacuum poured the steel columns of General Nikolai Vatatin's southwestern front, the Soviet 5th Tank Army, spearheaded by the 1st and 26th Tank Corps, did not stop to mop up resistance. Their orders were explicit: bypass strongpoints, ignore the flanks, and drive relentlessly southeast. Their objective was the German rear, and their destination was Kelek. The T-34s, masters of the winter steppe, churned through the snow at 20 miles per hour, appearing like ghosts out of the freezing fog to overrun supply depots, artillery batteries, and command posts. German officers, miles behind the front, looked up from their paperwork to see the red star of a Soviet tank aiming its cannon at their headquarters. The speed of the collapse was surreal, defying all German doctrines of response. At 6th Army headquarters, the initial reports were dismissed as exaggerated panic. General Paulus and his chief of staff, Arthur Schmidt, could not process the scale of the disaster. Their minds, conditioned by a year and a half of uninterrupted victory, refused to accept the possibility of a Soviet strategic offensive. They saw a local crisis, not a mortal threat. The only significant armored reserve available, the 48 Panzer Corps, was a shadow of a formation. Equipped with a mix of German tanks and outdated Czech-built Panzer 38 Ts, it was ordered to counterattack. but with confused orders and poor intelligence. It drove into a void, finding no clear enemy front, only a sea of Soviet armor that swarmed and overwhelmed it. The German response was a single, hesitant fire brigade sent to fight a tidal wave. On the morning of November 20th, the Southern hammer fell. At 10 a.m., after their own earth-shattering artillery barrage, General Andrei Yermomenko's Stalingrad front launched its assault. The Romanian Fourth Army, holding the line south of the city, met the same fate as their countrymen to the north. General Vasily Volsky's 4th Mechanized Corps sliced through their brittle defenses and pivoted north, a mirror image of the drive from the northwest. The southern pincer was now in motion, racing across the flat frozen Kalmyk steppe to complete the second half of the encirclement. Inside Stalingrad, the German soldiers of the Lee Army Corps continued their bitter fight for the Barricade factory, oblivious that the world behind them was ceasing to exist. They were fighting for a prize that had already been lost. The two Soviet spearheads were now separated by less than 70 miles of German-held territory. The entire rear area of the 6th Army was a chaotic swirl of rumor, panic, and desperate, isolated fights. Supply columns were ambushed and destroyed. Airfields were overrun. The logistical arteries that sustained the German war machine were being severed one by one. The key to the entire operation, the final lock in the trap, was a single steel bridge spanning the Don River at the town of Kalak. It was the most direct route connecting the two Soviet pincers. Its capture was paramount. If the Germans destroyed it, the link-up would be delayed for days, giving them precious time to organize a defense or attempt a breakout. Responsibility for this critical task fell to General Roding's 26th Tank Corps, the vanguard of the northern pincer. By the evening of November 21st, after a grueling 75-mile advance, they were on the outskirts of the town. But a direct assault would be costly and time-consuming. A different solution was needed. At 4 o'clock on November 22nd, a small, audacious detachment under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Gian Filipov was dispatched. It consisted of just 5 T-34 tanks and 2 motorized infantry companies and trucks. They drove not with stealth, but with brazen confidence. They switched on their headlights, a clear violation of all combat protocols, and rumbled towards the heavily guarded bridge. The German sentries on the western bank saw the approaching lights. In the chaos of the past 48 hours, with friendly units scattered and retreating, the sight of tanks was not immediately alarming. They assumed it was a German armored unit falling back, or perhaps the remnants of the 48 Panzer Corps, the Soviet crews, many of whom spoke some German, responded to the sentries' challenges with nonchalant waves. The lead T-34, flying a swastika flag captured earlier, slowly rolled onto the bridge's wooden planks. A German officer, still suspicious, walked towards the tank, demanding identification. He peered at the unfamiliar silhouette in the pre-dawn gloom, his sense of routine warring with a sudden sickening realization. The tank's turret began to traverse. The turret did not complete its turn. The German officer's moment of realization was his last. A single machine gun burst from the T-34's hull, cut him down. In that instant, the pretense of deception ended, and the battle for the bridge began. The Soviet tanks opened fire with every weapon they had, their cannons blasting the German guard posts at point-blank range, their machine guns raking the length of the bridge with tracer fire. From the trucks behind them, Filipov's infantry swarmed forward, shouting their battle cry. "Ura!" They were a storm of bayonets and submachine guns, their objective not just the bridge, but the demolition charges the German engineers had placed on its supports. The German guards, caught completely by surprise, fought back with desperate courage, but they were overwhelmed in minutes. In a furious close-quarters fight under the dark steel girders, The Soviet infantry located the wires leading to the explosives and cut them. The bridge was theirs. The gateway to the Sixth Army's rear was now wide open. Hours later, on the afternoon of November 23rd, the final act of the strategic drama played out on the open steppe. Near the small settlement of Sovetski, 25 miles southeast of Kilak, the lead tanks of the 4th Tank Corps, driving down from the north, spotted a column of tanks approaching from the south. For a tense moment, there was uncertainty. In the swirling snow and poor visibility, friend could easily be mistaken for foe. But then, a green flare shot into the low gray sky. It was answered by another. The tanks belonged to General Volsky's 4th Mechanized Corps, the vanguard of the southern pincer. The two iron sickles had met. The ring was closed. Tank commanders threw open their hatches, their faces black with cordite and grime, breaking into wide grins. Grimy, exhausted infantrymen slid off the tanks, running to embrace men they had never met, brothers in a victory so vast it was hard to comprehend. They had advanced nearly 100 miles in less than 4 days, shattering 3 armies and changing the course of the war. They had done the impossible. At the 6th Army's new headquarters near Nizhyn-Cherskaya, they had been forced to relocate twice in 2 days. The final devastating message arrived. A radio signal from a reconnaissance plane confirmed the link-up. General Paulus, General Schmidt, and the rest of the command staff stared at the map. The neat, colored lines that had represented the front were gone. In their place was a crude circle, hastily drawn in grease pencil, enclosing the city of Stalingrad and a vast swath of the empty steppe. Inside that circle were 20 German divisions and 2 Romanian divisions. The entirety of the 6th Army, the victors of Paris and Kiev, along with the bulk of Hoth's 4th Panzer Army, nearly 300,000 men. An entire German field army, the largest single formation in the Wehrmacht, was now completely surrounded, its supply lines cut. Its back to the frozen Volga. The news was relayed to Hitler's Wolfslehr headquarters in East Prussia. The initial reaction was one of furious disbelief. The Führer, who had publicly sworn that German soldiers would never leave Stalingrad, refused to countenance a breakout. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, made a catastrophic promise. He assured Hitler that his air force could supply the 6th Army from the air, delivering the 500 tons of food, fuel, and ammunition they needed every day. It was a logistical fantasy, born of arrogance and a complete misunderstanding of the capabilities of winter air transport. But it was what Hitler wanted to hear. The order came down from the highest level. The 6th Army was to stand fast. They were to form a fortress, an all-round defense. They would be designated Festung Stalingrad, Fortress Stalingrad. They were not to retreat. They were to wait for a relief effort that would surely come. For the soldiers in the rubble of the Red October factory. For the panzer crews shivering in their tanks on the open plain. For the staff officers in their freezing bunkers. The order was a death sentence, though few understood it yet. The tactical obsession with the city had led to a strategic catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. The hunters had become the hunted. The trap was shut. The lock was turned. For the men inside the newly formed Kessel, the battle for Stalingrad was over. The battle for survival had just begun. The Kessel was not a fortress. It was a tomb in the making. For the nearly 300,000 men trapped inside, the world shrank to a frozen perimeter of 175 miles. The initial shock gave way to a grim, disciplined hope. They were the 6th Army. They would hold. They would be relieved. That hope had a name, Operation Winter Storm, on Tournament Winter Gwitter. On December 12th, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, one of Germany's most brilliant commanders, launched a desperate relief effort from the southwest. His 4th Panzer Army, led by the Lee Panzer Corps, clawed its way north through blizzards and fierce Soviet resistance. For a few days, it seemed possible. Manstein's panzers reached the Mishkova River, just 30 miles from the pocket. The men inside the Kessel could hear the distant rumble of the guns. They packed their gear, ready for the breakout order, but the order never came. Hitler, fixated on holding the symbolic city, forbade it. Paulus, obedient to the last, refused to act without the Führer's permission. Manstein's spearhead, out of fuel and under immense pressure from Soviet armies attacking its own flanks, stalled. The window of opportunity, a tiny crack of light in the darkness, slammed shut. The rumble of the guns faded, replaced by the howl of the wind. Hope died on the banks of the Mishkova. The only lifeline left was the sky. Gring's promised air bridge was a catastrophic failure. The Luftwaffe was exhausted, operating from icy, primitive airfields far from the pocket. The transport fleet of Junkers 52s and Heinkel 111s flew into a gauntlet of Soviet anti-aircraft fire and Yak fighters. The sky, once a symbol of German dominance, became an alley of death. On a good day, just over 100 tons of supplies reached the Kessel, less than a quarter of the absolute minimum required. The 6th Army began to starve. Rations were cut to 200 grams of bread per day, then 100, then 50. The last of the 10,000 horses were slaughtered for meat. Ammunition dwindled. Frostbite claimed thousands of victims. Typhus, spread by lice, began its silent, deadly work. The proud army began to consume itself, dissolving into a desperate, freezing, starving mass. While the 6th Army withered, the Soviets tightened their grip. On January 8, 1943, General Konstantin Rokossovsky, commander of the Don Front, sent envoys under a flag of truce. They carried an ultimatum to Paulus: surrender with honor or face total annihilation. The terms were generous: food, medical care, and repatriation after the war. Paulus radioed Hitler for instructions. The reply was unequivocal: surrender is forbidden. 6th Army will hold their positions to the last man and the last round. On January 10th, the final Soviet offensive began. Codenamed Operation Ring, Operacja Kolco, it was a methodical execution. Thousands of Soviet guns opened fire, and 7 Soviet armies advanced from all sides, squeezing the pocket relentlessly. The starving, frostbitten German soldiers, many without a single round for their rifles, could offer little resistance. The Kessel was split in two. On January 31st, Soviet troops stormed the Univermag department store in the city's center, where Paulus had his headquarters. They found a broken man. The day before, Hitler had promoted him to the rank of Field Marshal. No German Field Marshal had ever surrendered. The message was clear. But Paulus chose life. He surrendered, along with his staff. On February 2, 1943, the last pocket of resistance in the northern part of the city laid down its arms. An eerie silence fell over the ruins. Of the nearly 300,000 German and Allied soldiers encircled by Operation Uranus, some 25,000 wounded had been evacuated by air. Over 100,000 had been killed in the fighting or died of cold and starvation. 91,000 men, including 24 generals, went into Soviet captivity. Of those 91,000, fewer than 6,000 would ever see Germany again. It was the single greatest military catastrophe in German history. The myth of Wehrmacht invincibility was not just broken. It was shattered and left to freeze in the rubble of a city that now bore Stalin's name. The shockwave from this defeat would be felt far beyond the banks of the Volga. That shockwave first manifested as a gaping wound in the Eastern Front, the annihilation of the 6th Army and its allied. Formations tore a 400-mile hole in the German line. Army Group A, deep in the Caucasus and reaching for the oil fields of Baku, was now in danger of being cut off and suffering the same fate. A desperate fighting retreat began. German soldiers who had marched victoriously towards the Caspian Sea now raced westwards, abandoning heavy equipment and hard-won territory, fighting not for conquest, but for survival. The grand strategic objective of Operation Blue, the seizure of Soviet oil, was abandoned forever. The entire southern wing of the German war effort in the east was in a state of near-collapse. In Germany, the truth could no longer be concealed by propaganda. On February 3, 1943, Joseph Goebbels' Ministry of Propaganda announced the disaster to the German people. For 3 days, all public entertainment was cancelled. Radio stations played somber, funereal music. It was the first time the Nazi regime had publicly admitted to a defeat of such magnitude. For millions of Germans, the news was a profound psychological blow. The belief in the Führer's infallibility and the Wehrmacht's invincibility was irrevocably damaged. The war, once a distant spectacle of triumphant newsreels, was now a grim reality of loss and sacrifice. The era of easy victories was over. The era of total war, of grimly holding on, had begun. For the Soviet Union, the opposite was true. The victory at Stalingrad was a national catharsis. It was the moment the tide turned, not just on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of the people. The Red Army, so often dismissed by the Germans as a primitive horde, had proven itself to be a sophisticated and resilient fighting force. It had mastered the very operational art, the deep envelopment, that had been the hallmark of the German blitzkrieg. The myth of the Slavic Untermensch, the subhuman and capable of complex military thought, died in the snows of Kalek. A new confidence surged through the Soviet ranks. They had met the best the Wehrmacht could throw at them, and they had destroyed it. From this point forward, the Red Army would hold the strategic initiative on the Eastern Front. They would dictate the time and place of the major battles, forcing the Germans into a reactive posture from which they would never recover. The strategic shift had global repercussions. The immense losses in men and materiel at Stalingrad and entire army groups' worth of equipment could never be fully replaced. The veteran NCOs and experienced officers lost in the Kessel were the backbone of the German army. Their absence would be felt on every front for the rest of the war. For Germany's allies, Italy, Hungary, and Romania, the disaster was proof that the war was unwinnable. Their commitment wavered, and they began to secretly seek a way out. For the Western Allies, Stalingrad was confirmation that the Soviet Union was not just a partner, but the primary engine of the Wehrmacht's destruction. It solidified the Grand Alliance and ensured the continued flow of Lend-Lease aid. The battle on the Volga ensured that when Allied troops finally landed in Normandy a year and a half later, they would face a German army already bled white on the Eastern Front. Stalingrad was more than a battle. It was the fulcrum upon which the entire war pivoted. The road to Berlin did not begin in Normandy or Sicily. It began in the frozen, rubble-strewn streets of Stalingrad and on the vast, weed-scoured steppes where Zhukov's trap was sprung. The consequences were written on the grandest strategic maps, but their origins lay in a singular, audacious plan and the iron will of the men who executed it. That iron will had a price, measured in the currency of human lives and a city erased from the earth. When the guns fell silent, Stalingrad was not a city, but a geographic location. A wilderness of brick, twisted steel, and frozen earth, haunted by the ghosts of over 1 million dead. The victory was total, but the silence that followed was profound, broken only by the wind whistling through the skeletal remains of factories and apartment blocks. It was a victory born from the ashes of near-total destruction. Operation Uranus was more than a brilliantly executed pincer movement. It was a turning point in the philosophy of war. It demonstrated that the German art of the blitzkrieg, with its emphasis on tactical finesse and rapid advances, could be broken by the brute force of industrial logistics and strategic deception on a colossal scale. The Red Army had absorbed the Wehrmacht's most painful lessons from 1941 and turned them into a weapon. They had learned that a modern war is won not just on the battlefield, but in the factories, on the railway lines, and in the quiet planning rooms far from the front. The T-34 tank, crude but effective, became the symbol of this new reality, the triumph of mass and resilience over complex and often fragile technology. Stalingrad became the war's great crucible. It burned away the myth of German invincibility and forged a new, hardened confidence in the Red Army. It proved that an army and a people could be pushed to the very edge of annihilation and not break. That they could endure unimaginable suffering and emerge with the strength to begin the long, bloody march to the enemy's capital. Today, the city of Volgograd stands rebuilt, a modern metropolis rising from the rubble of its past. But beneath the concrete and glass, the earth itself remembers. The soil is still seeded with the iron of shells and the bones of the fallen. The battle is over, but its echo remains a permanent, chilling testament to the turning of the tide, and a reminder that the fate of the world can be decided in the ruins of a single city, on the banks of a frozen river.